Good morning, all, and welcome to today's program. I'm Doug Lean, the Economic Development Manager for the City of Auburn. Today's program, Fundraising 101, is designed for a nonprofit business sector that we hope will enjoy the information and learn something to help your organization and your members and how to work together and stay strong in today's environment. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce Mayor Nancy Backus of the City of Auburn, Washington, that would like to open us with a few remarks this morning.
Thank you, Doug. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I hope we will be able to provide you with some valuable insights into how you can continue to reach your donors and thrive, not just survive during these challenging times that we're in. We often hear about the importance of supporting our small businesses, but our nonprofits, as you are very well aware, play such a valuable role in our community to help it maintain, to build, to grow, and maintain a thriving community. Your organizations offer critical services that not only contribute to the health and the economic stability of our residents, but also they strengthen us, right, by lifting the voices of the people that you serve. I am always humbled by the amount of work that you do in our community, that you remain vigilant in your service. You are servant leaders, and I want to thank you for your continued commitment to our community. And I hope, as I said earlier, you will find some valuable information here today that will allow you to continue to expand your sphere of influence and your service to our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. And with that, I would like to introduce Andy Cole. Andy is a founding principal for Convergent Nonprofit Solutions, a national consulting firm out of Atlanta, Georgia, with more than 20 years of for-profit, nonprofit fundraising experience. Andy is an equity principal of Convergent Solutions, a national group focused on developing sustainable funding strategies, raising capital for nonprofits, looking in how to improve their involvement and investment from their constituency. Andy has been personally responsible for thousands of investment requests and raised more than $60 million in 18 states for organizations that are positively impacting local and regional and national communities. With that, Andy, I'll turn the program over to you, and thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity today and appreciate the introduction. Thank you, Mayor, for I know you're super busy, and I appreciate your comments. And just before we dive into all the information that we have to share, I honestly do think I have one of the coolest jobs around. Being able to work within an organization and help nonprofits like yours raise the money that's necessary to fulfill your mission is very personally rewarding. So it's really exciting to be able to get up every day and feel motivated and motivated by the people that we work with and that we partner with, the nonprofits that are boots on the ground, like your organizations, and especially in a year like 2020, a year, honestly, that I can say that is unlike any other, and continue to lean in and push the ball forward and continue to meet the needs of your local community. So it's an honor to be here with you today. I appreciate your time. Couple of sort of housekeeping items. This is part one of a two-part webinar series. And so there's a ton of material to cover. I've got lots of slides, lots of content, but this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the website on later, I think this afternoon, but it will be available for you to watch at a later time. So if you need to take notes or anything like that, you'll be able to, at your leisure, to go back and watch the full recording. So I'll go ahead and dive into the presentation a little bit. I've already kind of given already been provided an introduction about myself, but personally I live in Cary, North Carolina, just outside Raleigh. Actually started in the fundraising business back in '96 and have really managed fundraising events and campaigns and worked with nonprofits off and on for well over 20 years and managed a whole host of fundraising campaigns personally, right now in more of a business development role, one of the equity owners of Convergent companies based in Atlanta. But actually since day one, it's so 2020 now when everyone's working from home, but we've been actually since day one working out of our homes. Being consultants, we're typically embedded with the nonprofits that we're working with, and was never really seen as a necessity to have a formal office space, which has been obviously good for the current times. Little background about our firm and the space that we're in. Tom Rawser, who will be giving the webinar, the second part of our two-part webinar series. I made a mistake and said that one time he wrote the book on return on investment for nonprofits. That's not true. He wrote a book, Return on Investment for Nonprofits, that has subsequently written Asking Rights. And then just now recently, Real Time is releasing his new book, The 5-Minute Fundraiser. And so this has been a core focus of ours for a very long time. And we'll get into sort of the return on investment mantra and how you can embed it into some of your marketing and communications if you're not already. And if you are, maybe we can give you some tips on how to improve that particular language. But it is something that is to our core that we try and really work with our nonprofits and partner with them and making sure that they are using the right language to, whether it's grants, foundations, or your stakeholders, where people are understanding the value of the outcomes of the programs that your organization is implementing currently. We work with nonprofits all over the country, large and small. Here's a handful of logos of organizations that we've worked with, anything from the YMCA to a Capitol Theater, hospice, which is very close to my heart, community colleges, chambers of commerce, economic development groups, humane societies, homeless shelters, pretty much any nonprofit that has a need for improving their particular asking rights, and then also either about to embark on a fundraising campaign or actively going out and raising money through a fundraising effort, whether it's annual fund or a long-term, more capital campaign. That's really the organizations where we play. So just to start things out, talk about fundraising today, just the landscape. Right before we started the presentation here, was talking with the mayor and Doug about, how are things looking? That I think that there's an impression that all nonprofits have just been decimated this year, and maybe some have. But as a whole, it's not, our understanding and our experience in the organizations that we're working for right now is it's not nearly as bleak as people would like to believe, or maybe that they were under the impression that it's very bleak right now. Giving from the first quarter of 2020 was 6% below first quarter last year, but in the second quarter, the overall number of donors actually increased over 7%, new donors over 12%. So there's a lot of new people that have, basically been coming out of the woodwork and understanding that nonprofits right now are hurting, and there's an increased need, right? I mean, 2020 has been nothing but increased need. There's a lot of nonprofits that have seen the need for services increase, and that obviously increases the cost, which in turn increases the need for additional funding in order to serve those in your community. So I have a handful of slides that we took from the Association of Fundraising Professionals. And again, just kind of gives you a little bit more of a inside look, a sneak peek of how things are shaping up this year. Donors talked about just over 7% increase. The donations actually year-to-date change, 7.5% increase. This is year-to-date. And then donor retention actually up about 2%. Again, not nearly as bleak of a picture as I think that a lot of people might be under that impression. There are, as I discussed just a minute ago, there are new investors out there. People are understanding that there's a real need and are stepping up to the plate. New donors this year up 12%. Retained donors is actually down but is compensated, I think, by the new donors that have come forward. Repeat retained donors up just over 3%, and then recaptured donors year to date up over 15%. And you can see at the chart below that through the first half of the year, through 2 quarters, the percentage of donations overall is up 56%. So it's actually just up just over half. General donors, giving is up. The trend is up. Year to date, 19%. Mid-level donor, and that's, sorry, the general donor is donors under $250. So those are up significantly, 19%. Mid-level donor, which we're defining as $250 to $1,000, year-to-date change up 8%. Major donors, which is, honestly, we're going to talk about that a little bit, but this is the 80-20 rule. Typically 80% of your funding is going to come from your major donors, 20% of the donor pool. And here major donors are up year-to-date 6%. So again, not nearly as bleak as a lot of folks would think on the outside. So it's not all that bad. I mean, I know personally, and talking to family and friends, we have not only continued to give back at our normal levels. I have actually committed more money this year than in years past, just understanding that there is that additional need. So part of the discussion today is to really talk about, from a nonprofit perspective, so the organizations that are represented on this webinar, where are you spending your time? Where are you spending your dollars? It's really important to not only have a plan, but make sure that it's an effective plan, that you're using your limited resources wisely. This is going to be a question, if it's not already being asked by your stakeholders, it either should be or will be, especially as you go out and continue to raise dollars. And I think the more money that you are going to raise, the tougher the questions are going to be. But a lot of really savvy investors will ask the question, how are you going to use my money, and how will it impact the community? Will it allow you to scale? Will it allow you to be sustainable? All sorts of really tough questions that you as an organization should be able to answer. And not only that, but you should actually offer those answers prior to people even asking. So it's important as an organization to at least communicate to your stakeholders that you are using their money wisely. And to an extent, most nonprofits have a lot of special events. Of course, not as many this year. And if there are as many, they've gone virtual due to the protocols around the COVID-19. Annual giving, capital campaigns, major gifts, planned gifts, memorial gifts. Here you can really see in pretty clear format that the special events are high cost. The return is not nearly as good as other avenues. Annual giving, capital campaigns actually offers the best return on investment. Major gifts is next. Planned gifts is also a very good return. And then memorial gifts, also a good return. But here, really, I think the glaring thing is the special events are probably your least beneficial in regards to return on investment. In other words, it's not only just the cost of actually the hard cost of putting on special events, it's the time and effort. A lot of organizations don't necessarily take that into consideration, or they don't track that maybe to the extent that they should. But if you really add up all of the time from volunteers, that counts too, and your staff, your board members, the whole 9 yards, plus the cost of actually doing the event, hosting the event, promoting the event, and all of that, the costs are substantial. So here, these are costs that we pulled from Association of Fundraising Professionals as well. If you look at the very bottom, as I talked about the special events, so those benefit events, special events, typically it costs you 50 cents on the dollar. So it costs you 50 cents to raise every dollar doing your special events. Now, that's probably changed a bit this year, especially as organizations like yours are doing virtual events, there's not nearly the same cost, but you're probably not raising as much either. But the general sense, and the reason why I'm laying out the landscape the way we are, is because part of today's lesson, I guess, is to just understand where it is that you as an organization can maybe put additional resources, or at least be thinking about as you are updating your development plan, your fundraising plan going forward, that long-term capital campaigns, typically that are over, you're getting commitments over a multi-year period, are only 5 to 10 cents per dollar raised. Obviously, the ROI is substantially different in that regard. Doing grant writing for corporations and foundations, 20 cents per dollar raised. Direct mail, that's obviously a really high cost, much more than actual special events. But there's some rationale to doing events and doing direct mail, that you acquire a new investor, a new donor, that over time, over the course of their lifetime, could substantially change the landscape of funding towards your organization. So there's additional benefits of acquiring not only just a new donor, but in the lifetime of that donor. Obviously, these costs will change a bit, but again, just wanted to lay out the landscape for those that are down in the trenches like you are. Again, of just understanding what the actual cost is, typically, at least within the nonprofit space, of going about these different fundraising methods. The direct mail renewals, so basically this is to reaching out through direct mail to stakeholders that are already in your camp, so to speak, that's only a 25 cents on the dollar raised versus the direct mail acquisition of a new donor. Obviously, it's $1.25 to $1.50, so you're actually losing money to originally acquire that new donor. But again, over the lifetime of that relationship, the benefit is going to be much greater. So a lot of organizations during the pandemic have gone to virtual events. That's obviously something that you should do, that you could do, and that keeps you in contact with your constituency, your stakeholders, your donors. But we advise organizations to take a hard look at the annual fundraising strategy and then also capital campaign strategy, which are, again, sort of the low end of of the cost of fundraising dollar expense per dollar raised. And really looking at transitioning not completely away from virtual events, but definitely making it part of your long-term strategy. A capital or an annual campaign, in sum, is really just a more cost-effective way to raise money. And as an organization, just like a business, you want to maximize your return on investment. So the old funding model, you apply for a grant with outcomes determined by the application. You ultimately, as an organization, then you deliver the program. The operations produces the required report, and then you pray for funding to be renewed. That's the cycle. An investment campaign model is a bit different. Funder invests in outcomes. The nonprofit organization establishes programs. The service impact is measured and marketed. And then you go back and a larger investment is made. Why? Because you can show the impact of the money that has been raised and spent. You can measure it, you can understand it, and then you can communicate it back to your original funder. And I tell you, it's like magic. If you use the money appropriately, you can show that the money had an impact of significant value, and then you just need to make it where it's easy to understand, where you don't have to connect like 18 dots to understand the impact that it is that the programs that you as an organization have provided using this money. Then ultimately people are going to see that the money was well spent, and they'll be happy to provide not only just a renewal of that commitment, but they will actually increase that commitment. And that's ultimately where you want to go, right? As an organization, you want to not only just be treading water, you want to actually increase the capacity of your programs to meet the greater need and the greater good in general. So at Convergent, our fundraising philosophy is a little bit untraditional, although I think that a lot of organizations out there and even nonprofits have been trending towards our line of thinking, I think, in past years. But to some organizations, it's an emotional, right? Hospice. My father-in-law passed away from cancer many years ago and went through hospice. So that's something that's just, it's very personal to me. And anyone that knows somebody that has gone through end-of-life care using hospice, I'm sure you've been touched in a way that you can't really describe to others. And so it's very emotional. Someone were to come to me and ask me for money, more than likely I would do something to some extent because I have that connection. So the appeal is warm and fuzzy, it's emotional, and there's that connection. But in general, the further that you can go towards the right-hand side here, as you can see the slide, towards bottom line, you can talk about specific examples, use statistics, which now you're looking at that outputs circle, stakeholder surveys. You can, as an organization, you can talk about these things that you've done, but the beauty and really the promised land is an organization. If you can then talk about the outcomes of the programs that your organization is implementing, what the economic impact is, what the organizational impact, organizational value proposition is, the OVP. If you can actually show, again, that links back to the previous slide, if you can show potential stakeholders and your current funders the impact of the programs that you're providing, and boy, if you can get to where it's specific to that organization that you're talking to or that individual that you're talking to, then that's a home run. And the whole idea is that you actually want not just the emotional appeal, you don't want just the rational appeal. I mean, if you can, the sweet spot in fundraising, if you can find that middle spot, and Tom's going to talk a little bit about this in his webinar next week, but that's really the sweet spot. You want that rational appeal, that you can show that you're a sustainable organization, the money's being well spent, and there's a real impact. And then if you can tie in that emotional appeal, and if you're talking to someone that already has a connection to your organization or at minimum the cause of your nonprofit, that's where you'll raise the most money. And that's where ultimately you want to be, right? So I wanted to talk through, I have a handful of slides now to talk about the traditional campaign process. Some of you are already familiar with this, some may not be, but it's important to understand the landscape of what you're getting into, how long it takes, and the basic steps of a traditional feasibility study and fundraising campaign. So I'm going to go into quite a bit of detail in each one of these with a handful of slides just to really provide the lay of the land of a properly conducted fundraising effort, which always starts with a feasibility study. You know, some organizations just say, you know what, we have a need. We've already got an architect drawing. We already have sort of the plans here. We need to hire people. We have to do these programs, and here's the costs. We're going to go out and ask for money. You can absolutely raise money that way. But I will guarantee you, without a shadow of a doubt, that going through a process, doing a thorough feasibility study first, prior to launching into your capital campaign, you'll raise more money without a shadow of a doubt. And we're going to talk through that here in just a minute. But you always start with a feasibility study, go into the quiet phase of a campaign, and then the public phase. And again, I'm going to talk through these. I've got slides that will go into detail for each one of these. But ultimately, the feasibility study is the building block of any successful fundraising effort. And that is where you really just put together a draft plan. You go out and obtain candid, confidential feedback through that plan. And then you're at the same time, you're cultivating, you are positioning your campaign for success, finding what, you know, the right leadership, and that type of thing. And then you update the plan based on the feedback you receive, and then launch into your actual funding campaign. So why is a feasibility study critical? Number one, you are basically asking your constituents in your community, your region, your state, whatever service area that you serve, you're going out and interviewing them in a confidential, candid basis. So we go in and interview folks on a one-on-one basis. We don't take anyone from the board. We don't take anyone from the staff. We have about 20 to 25 questions that we ask, and it's all critical stuff. And number one, we're making sure that the organization we're representing has asking rights. Does the stakeholder or the prospect, do they feel confident in the organization, the leadership, the programs that are outlaid, that the money will be well spent, and so much so that they would write a big check? That's pretty important to know prior to launching a fundraising effort. We're also getting opinions on the plan specifically, the draft plan. We get opinion about the board and actually the staff of your organization as part of, again, kind of testing the waters and finding out if people believe in the organization and that the organization has asking rights. We're asking about potential naming opportunities, if that's even part of the plan, and then potential partnerships. And then through this process, we're uncovering potential funding and leadership, which is really critical. You know, it's one thing to write a check. It's going to pay for the programs, kind of makes the world go round. But unless there's passionate leaders within the community that will step up and not only just write you a check, but they say, I believe so strongly in this program that I am going to put my name and or my company name behind this and help go make it happen. If we can't find that, if we can't find those leaders, the campaign cabinet sort of folks, maybe 10 to 12 campaign leaders, then we know that that's a bit of a red flag, and that'll be something that we'll uncover and discuss and talk through prior to launching a major fundraising effort. But the beauty behind this, just in a nutshell, is that you are putting together a draft plan, the prospectus that will go out to 80 to maybe 100 of your community leaders, your stakeholders. And as a cover letter, you're going to have a couple of your most visibly known leaders sign a letter that basically says this: here's where the organization has come. You're telling a bit of a story. Here's where we are today, and here's where we would like to go. But here's the most critical piece. Are you ready? Prior to taking the next step, we have hired XYZ firm to come out and get your opinion first. You have no idea how powerful that is to basically say, we're not going in this direction until we have someone come out and sit down and talk to you in a confidential manner and get your feedback first prior to taking the next step. It's unbelievably powerful. And the whole idea is that you're wanting to get people's feedback through this feasibility study process prior to finalizing the plan and then going forward and asking for money. Because the whole idea is you want a community plan. You don't want to just say, hey gang, here's our plan, now give us a check. You can do that again, but it's not, you know, all of our advice is based on many years of experience and boots on the ground fundraising for our clients. And ultimately, we know that you'll be able to raise more money with a thorough feasibility study, building that consensus, because as the quote here on the bottom of the slide says, if they help write the plan, ultimately they'll help underwrite the plan. Do you know why? Because when you're done with the feasibility study and you update it with the feedback you receive, now they're almost obligated to write a check, right? Because they feel that, okay, you asked for my opinion, I gave you my opinion, now you've updated the plan based on the feedback I gave you, and they want to support it now because it includes their comments, it includes their guidance. And so ultimately, now it's within their benefit to support the plan because it includes their feedback. And so it's just really powerful stuff. These to go to your stakeholders and have them get their fingerprints on the plan, take some ownership of the plan, then go ask for money and say, hey, look, guess what? We updated our goal. We shifted some things out. We included some things in that maybe wasn't included. My favorite question of the whole survey in a feasibility study is what's missing. Completely open-ended question. And to an extent, it's just, hey, you know, lot of leaders put together this plan over a course of time, but before it's finalized, is there anything missing? Is there anything you would like to see that maybe is not included? And it's a great open-ended question that we get all sorts of wonderful feedback, and many times there's a theme within the community of saying, hey, why isn't this addressed? And boy, I would fund this specifically if it was included in the plan. And if we hear that enough, then we'll include it in the final plan. So kind of lay this out. Normally, as far as timeline for a feasibility study, 8 to 12 weeks is normal. In fundraising, and it's the same with feasibility studies, speed is not your friend. You really want to take your time putting together a proper prospectus, putting together an appropriate list of interviewees. It's all about quality over quantity. You're looking for people that have a connection to the cause, that have capacity, and not only just the people that are currently donors of the organization, but others that maybe should be, but maybe just don't currently have a connection to the nonprofit. So it's like playing with house money when you're doing a feasibility study. The more people that you interview and the new potential stakeholders that you could bring into the mix by just going out and having a candid conversation is wonderful. So it's really a great opportunity to have someone go in and talk to folks in a candid, open, there's no pressure. We're not asking for money. We're just gathering information. So it's a wonderful way to cultivate potential donors and get their candid feedback prior to going out and asking for money. And so the preparation phase here on the left-hand slide, or left-hand part of the slide, is putting together that prospectus, the interview request letter, which I talked about, putting together the interviewee list, an investment range table, which basically, if you're trying to raise 5 million, we understand that the top 10 commitments normally are going to be about 60 to 70%, and that you're typically looking for a 15 to 20% lead commitment. So easy math on a $5 million campaign, we'd prefer if we ended up getting an indication at the $1 million level as a lead commitment. 15 to 20% is normal, so 750,000 would do. But in general, it doesn't always shake out to be this way, but normally it's pretty top heavy. And in the beginning part of this, we'll put together a questionnaire, the calendar, and then ultimately we'll go out and interview. Normally it's 40 to 60. Again, quality over quantity. We'd much prefer to have 40 interviews and have them with the right people just versus 60 people that had some free time. We end up taking a couple of weeks to go through the analysis of all the data. Again, about 20 to 25 questions times, say 50 or 60 interviews. That's a lot of information to digest, and that we'll dig into this information, put together our report and recommendations based on all the findings that we have, and then we'll have a very rock solid plan on how to move forward. And one of the first questions that people ask me is, well, do you always recommend that you move forward? Absolutely not. Many times we might come back and say, you know what, you're not ready, or maybe the community's not ready, or maybe there's too many other engagements or fundraising events happening right now that the timing is not right. There's a host of reasons. Normally, we are recommending that nonprofits move forward. We might be testing, again, to use that 5 million number. We might recommend 5 million. We might recommend something a little bit less. And then typically there's some nuggets in there about, board development, communications to your constituents, and or a whole host of things that we dig into and that we dig up by doing all these interviews, that again, so you can shore up the case for support based on the feedback you receive. Maybe you might take out an initiative that just didn't test very well. That's fine. That's part of the reason why we go through this process, because it's one thing to just ask people, hey, what do you think of the plan, without talking about the funding. 9 times out of 10, people are going to be just like, oh yeah, this sounds great, do it all. And then let's add in some stuff. Boy, this would be great too. But the rubber meets the road, so to speak, when you actually then bring in the conversation of funding, and you say, okay, based on all these programs here, the budget is $5 million over 5 years. Now, what do you think of the plan? To what extent might you write a check to support the plan? So that completely changes the dynamics of the conversation when you bring in the funding component Because the whole idea of going through this process is not just to update the plan. You want a fundable plan. A fundable plan. What is a fundable plan? It is a plan that, in other words, that the community will support. How many times any other organizations or people that have been consultants on this call, organizations put together a plan and then it sits on the shelf. Why? Because they don't have the funds to implement all of the initiatives in the plan. And so this process is coming back and, okay, if maybe it's not $5 million, but we found $4 million. And here are the things that people are most excited to write a check for. And so you slim down the plan and maybe take out some things that didn't test well. You might include some things that weren't in the initial plan, but are important to your stakeholders. Now you come out of it, boom, fundable plan. And it's a plan that is not developed by your staff and your board or you as a CEO. It is now a community plan. And that's the way to go about, that's our recommendation of how to go about this the best. Because even when you get through a feasibility study, I always recommend bring in an outsider. Lots of other companies out there do what we do. You don't have to use us specifically. Lots of other companies do this, but bring in an outsider to help you with your feasibility study, because they will give you, I always tell our clients, listen, we're going to tell you what you need to hear, and it may not be what you want to hear, but that's the sign of a good consultant. And that's what you want. You want somebody to come in and not really kind of provide any, blow any smoke, so to speak. It is, hey, here's the honest, candid truth. Here's what the landscape looks like. And here's how we think that you should attack this going forward with your fundraising efforts. Because you can do the fundraising on your own. It's not rocket science. But the feasibility study, you know, again, because we don't have anybody else in the room and because it is a confidential interview, people will tell us lots and lots and lots of things that they wouldn't tell us if somebody from your organization was in the room. So believe me, after we're done with the 3 weeks of interviews, about 50 of those, we have a very clear understanding of what the landscape looks like for your potential fundraising effort. So I'm not going to go through each one of these bullets one by one. I think I've pretty much covered a lot of these in my comments, and you can see how animated I am about the importance of a feasibility study, because it really is. We don't ask for money during the feasibility study at all. We're asking about potential checks and levels of support. Like, if this campaign were to go forward, to what level might you fund it? But ultimately, this is an opportunity to cultivate your major stakeholders, find out what makes them tick. And then, of course, the beauty is you get to use this information prior to going out and asking for money. So by the time you get to your actual fundraising campaign, well, first of all, I got to do this slide. This is one of my favorite slides. Bottom line, I'm a bottom line guy, right? So why do you want to complete a study? Well, ultimately, beyond testing the plan, making sure that the plan is the right plan and people are behind it, you're finding the leadership and all the other things I've talked about. The bottom line is you need to know how much water's in the pool before you dive in. And hopefully for your nonprofit, there's going to be more water in the pool than this guy's about to find out, because he's in big trouble. But again, so if you have a plan that is a $5 million plan and it's to do certain things, put forth certain programs, and maybe there's only 3 million out there, it's important to know that prior to launching your fundraising campaign, because ultimately nobody wants to fall short. I mean, I'd rather have a $3 million goal and then you blow through it versus putting together a $5 million goal and falling way short. So the whole idea is if the recommendation is less than what the organization needs, you just have to right size the plan based on the feedback you receive. And that way it is a fundable plan. It's going to be something that the community will support. They'll appreciate that the organization has kind of pared the plan back a little bit, maybe so it won't cost as much, but ultimately it will reflect their sentiment. So again, going back to my my previous comments, the whole idea about doing that is then going out when you're in the quiet phase of your fundraising campaign. Now you're going out to typically your constituents that you've already interviewed in the feasibility study, and you already have a lot of information about what makes them tick, what they like, what they don't like, what's missing. You know, would they lead a campaign? To what level might they support it? So you have all this information now as you're going out asking them to make a commitment to the final plan that now reflects their feedback. So we call it a quiet phase. It's not the secret phase. Maybe some people think that, oh, okay, you're kind of, clandestine, you're going through the night and not letting people that you're fundraising. That's not true. Really, it is. The quiet phase is about the development of your campaign materials. You're refining the program based on the feedback from the study. We have an evaluation process where we actually put together a list of potential donors, and we don't just go out there and say, give till it hurts. We put together a very rational case for support that is also accompanied by a specific request for a specific amount. And we can rationalize that amount, whether it's tied to a naming opportunity or their return on investment, a whole host of things. Then we go out and ask for money. So that's all part of that quiet phase of the fundraising effort. And the quiet phase normally is 20 to 40, maybe solicitations on the front end of your campaign. It's the really big ones, and it's the ones that are going to really move the needle. The most critical piece, though, is this yellow box, leadership recruitment. With leadership, we don't go out and just ask whoever has some free time and that loves the cause, hey, will you come help us? Every leader that we recruit also comes with an ask. We're asking for them to support the campaign at whatever level that typically that we're asking them to lead. If it's a major gifts division, then we're going to ask them for a major commitment. And so, again, in our experience, in order to maximize the amount of funding for your organization, we have the process where we don't admit them as a leader for the organization, for the fundraising campaign, until they've made a commitment themselves. And preferably, they've made a commitment at a level that will help inspire others, especially at whatever division that they're representing. So it's much more powerful if I'm going out asking for money and I have a local leader that has already made a commitment, and we go ask somebody else for money to support your nonprofit. Because if they have a relationship, they know each other, what's probably one of the first questions that they're going to ask? Hey, how much did you give? And so it's really important that volunteer leaders say, hey, listen, we believe so strongly in this cause and in this organization that we've already invested at a $10,000 a year level. And so again, if you don't have that as a volunteer leader for that organization and for that fundraising campaign, you'll be able to raise money, but it won't be nearly as impactful as if you can already say, we've already made X commitment. So that's why it's important that when we recruit people, it's done with an ask, and it's done with the expectation that they're going to make a pledge early in the campaign, and that their pledge will be at a level that will help inspire others. Again, it will make the next one that much easier, the next one, and the next one. Ultimately, once we get through our leadership recruitment, we dive into major prospect solicitation. It's basically top down. We go after all of the really major prospects, cash-wise or donation-wise, whether it's in kind, could be foundations, grants. Those are all done on the front end. And normally when you get through your quiet phase, you've raised preferably about 60% of your funding before you go public. Timeline, you can see at the bottom, can be anywhere between 6 to 12 months, depending on the size, the footprint of the organization. We've done some national campaigns, some statewide, some are countywide, and some are citywide or townwide. So it varies quite a bit. And then the actual capital campaign itself is like a totally different animal. After you have your kickoff event, you've announced your 60% goal, and then, boy, you just take the governor off, and it's, pedal to the metal. It's now really a numbers game. When you can go out and show the community, hey, look, 25 commitments so far, we've already got 65% of our total raised, and now you have a strong leadership team that can really, somebody can look at that brochure and say, whoa, you really have the movers and shakers here. And then you've got an honor roll showing the companies and individuals at the levels that, again, will help inspire others. So now it's all about the law of inertia. Everyone wants to be on the moving train. Everyone wants to be part of something successful. So the whole beginning part, the quiet phase, is done so to really lay the groundwork to a successful fundraising effort. Because I tell you, once you get to the back end, and you already have 65% or 60 to 70% of the money raised, and you have all the right leaders behind it, it really is just a matter of going out and spreading the good word, spreading the gospel, so to speak. It's really a numbers game at that standpoint. And again, that's when you really want to broaden the base of support. A lot of our fundraising efforts are face-to-face. Of course, now not so much. We're going to talk a little bit towards the back end of the presentation about the effect that the pandemic has had and how you as organizations can pivot in that regard. But a lot of this too can be done via mail and telephone, the smaller commitments, again, to really broaden the base of support. But in general, the back end, the public phase won't be successful without a successful quiet phase. And honestly, unless you are to at least 50 at minimum percent, preferably 60% or higher, then we don't recommend rolling into the public phase, because you want, before you go public with your fundraising effort, you really want to make sure without a shadow of a doubt you're going to hit your goal. And that's why we recommend that you preferably already have 60% committed prior to going public. So going through some of the blocking and tackling things, as you will, I've already mentioned a few of these. The prospectus is obviously really important. It really, ties into the front end of your feasibility study. Again, I've talked a lot of this through, so I'm not going to go through each one of these bullets one by one, but it really provides an overview of where as an organization you've been, where you are today, where you would like to go. And part of this document, I didn't mention this before, is a budget. How much are you looking to raise and what will it be used for? So you want to get people's impression during the study of what they think about the metrics, what they think about the budget prior to, again, finalizing your plan. Case for support. This is really, some people use case for support when we're talking about the feasibility study. We prefer to use prospectus because that's a draft. We literally typically leave draft watermark on every page of the prospectus, just so people understand that the plan is not finalized, that it's really, we're just looking for input. The case is really for your actual fundraising effort, and it is finalized at that stage. We've gotten the feedback. Now we're using this going out as we're asking for money, and it's much more detailed. It includes lots of data, benchmarks, goals, specifics of how the money will be used over what period, and what the specific initiatives are going to fund. And then ultimately, the bottom bullet here is the budget. Again, what is the total funding goal and what's the return on investment? You need to be able to communicate that to your potential stakeholders as you're going out and asking for money. I have a couple quick examples, case examples. One is for the Thomasville Chamber. I actually did this campaign personally back in 2010 during the last recession. It was not during a pandemic, so I didn't have that luxury of raising money during a pandemic, but it was during an extremely difficult time in financially, and again, just in the middle of a recession. Not small campaign in regards to what we normally deal with, $900,000 over 5 years. And ultimately it was to upfit a chamber building that used to be, well, the building was actually an old bank building, and they wanted to upfit it to turn it into a chamber facility. And there was a host of things in the prospectus. Actually, the original budget was double the $400,000 that you see here. And it included a marketing and promotion. Anyone that's been to Thomasville, North Carolina, it's a community of about 25,000 people that's near High Point, known for furniture, High Point furniture. So is Thomasville. Some of you actually may own Thomasville furniture. And they were just decimated with all the jobs going over to China. And so they were trying to reinvent themselves and to promote Thomasville, let everybody know, hey, we're still open for business. And so as part of the plan, it was, hey, we want to market Thomasville and say, hey, we're still here, and really promote themselves through communication, marketing, and all that. When we did the feasibility study, it was more than one person that said, well, what are you going to promote? The big chair? And in Thomasville, no joke, there's a big wooden chair downtown. It's about 3 or 4 stories high. And they were known as Chair City. And as part of the original plan, we didn't have anything in there about really coming up with a new message, a new Thomasville. And so we took this information in, and again, ties into my previous conversation about how important that feasibility study is. When we updated the plan, number one, we really took out a ton of money that we had to upfit the building, because a lot of people said it was too much. So we took that into consideration. But then we also added this second bullet here, strategic planning and visioning, $50,000. Super teeny tiny budget when you're looking at a $900,000 fundraising effort, but that was not part of the original plan. And the whole idea behind the strategic planning initiative was that we were going to include the city of Thomasville, the public, and the business community to have input on where the community would like to go and how they would like to market themselves. Like, what do they want to be when they grew up after being furniture manufacturers? And that resonated so well within the community. By the time we went out and actually asked for money, everyone just sat up and they were like, oh my God, you actually listen. This is so awesome. So now we get to do the strategic planning and visioning component prior to actually doing any marketing. And so it just really resonated. And boy, people just got out their checkbooks and they supported the campaign. The beauty about this too, in this example, the city of Thomasville wrote a check for that $50,000, and they weren't even on our original target list as someone that should be asked for money for this particular campaign. So a real success story in how you can listen to your stakeholders, respond accordingly, and then again, they'll be willing to support your effort if they feel like they've been engaged throughout the whole process. Campaign brochure, getting back into the actual campaign components, it really boils down to you being able to communicate your vision, having the right people behind it. It's really critical that you can show that you have, maybe if they're not active in going out and helping you raise money, that they will be recognized as saying, hey, we support the cause and we back the organization and what they're doing, which is your honorary campaign cabinet. And then ultimately you're boiling down, it's a miniature version of your case statement, so to speak. And you really are communicating what initiatives that you're trying to raise money for, what your total goal is. And again, the real meat of the brochure is communicating the outcomes, the return on investment, what the impact will be to the community. And then you always want to list your board of directors and staff, just so for people that aren't familiar with the organization or understand who's involved from a leadership standpoint, that you've included that as well. A couple of basic campaign principles. Leadership is absolutely critical. I mentioned it once already, it's worth repeating. If you do not have the right people, the community leaders, not all board members of yours, obviously not staff, but others in the community, if you can't find the right people with the passion and hopefully the checkbook as well, the resources to get behind this and help make it happen, it's going to be a slog. You'll struggle. Ultimately, we find, again, our advice really hovers around this idea of we're trying to maximize the total amount of funding for the organizations that we represent. Using a multi-year pledge period is preferred. I'm not going to get into the details. Some organizations do a 3-year, some a 4, and some a 5. 5-year pledge period, we recommend the 5-year pledge period. Again, because you'll maximize the total amount of funds. Some organizations will say, hey, I'm only going to commit to 1 year and you're going to have to come back and get a commitment each year. That's okay too. But a 5-year pledge commitment cycle is our recommendation. You need to be careful about talking about averages and fundraising. Some clients say, well, all we need is $1,000 from all of our business community. If each business were to do $1,000, boom, we don't need a campaign. We're done. But there are organizations out there. I'm going to talk in a minute about Roanoke, Virginia, and the Regional Economic Development Group we raised money for there. Our last campaign, the local hospital gave $100,000 a year over a 5-year period, which was unheard of. In years past, I think they'd done about 40,000, but nobody ever really thought that they would do that higher amount, but nobody had ever asked them. And so there are companies and individuals that are going to have a greater connection to your cause and maybe have greater capacity, that they're going to, again, if you can find a lead commitment in that 15 to 20% range, that's where they need to be. And again, you're going to raise a lot more money that way versus just going out and trying to get everyone to do a flat sum, because ultimately there are people and organizations that are going to benefit more than others, and it makes sense that they step up accordingly financially. So asking for enough, in my example with that with the hospital in Roanoke, a lot of people just don't you don't want to ask for too much, right? Anyone that's been on those solicitation calls where you blow people out of their chair, you ask for $1 million and they're like, whoa, hey, who came up with that number? Why would you ask me for $1 million? And it really, it's a negative. It sets a bad tone for the meeting, and it's just not a good scene in general. But you do want to ask for enough. You want to make it a little uncomfortable when you make that ask, but not so uncomfortable that it makes them go the other way and they think that, you know, whatever commitment they do is not going to be enough, so they just don't do anything. And then one step at a time. Our process is not the fastest way to raise money, but you will raise the most money. Again, going through step 1, step 2, step 3, cultivate, communicate, you know, you have all these touch points, and then you ask for the big commitments. Just going out and asking for money right away is not the best way to go about it. And so it's important that you follow the process. And it's not the quickest way to raise money, but ultimately that's not what you're looking for. You're looking to really maximize the amount of money that you're able to raise for your community. So real quick, I'll talk about this case study for the Roanoke Regional Partnership. This was another one. This was actually the last campaign that I managed. It was right after Thomasville, and was for a group that, a regional economic development group, 4 counties, 318,000 population. And it was not a traditional economic development plan that we were out raising money for. They really wanted to promote their community as a wonderful place to live, to raise a family, and to be outdoors. And you'd think it more maybe resonates with a visitors bureau type of thing, but they saw way down the road that this was going to be a way to attract people, and ultimately the businesses would come. It's a miniature version, a really small version of the way Austin went about doing things, because Austin's just a hip, cool place to be. And a lot of people wanted to live there, and then all the companies flocked. And this was something similar. And that within their economic development organization, they actually put on an outdoor festival. They hosted a marathon, which they've branded as the US, I guess the country's toughest road marathon. It goes up and down lots and lots of hills. I only did the half, and it was brutal. But it was something that took a little, I don't know, communicating and really looking at the organizational value proposition, the big picture of where the organization wanted to go. And companies were a little bit hesitant at first to buy in, but ultimately we were able to really communicate that vision and show them the landscape, the long term of what this could mean. And so they bought in, and boy, oh boy, the community just actually took off. They were able to recruit a couple of breweries, a couple of like outdoor firms, LL Bean and some others that really just resonated with the message that they were promoting. And then the second time we came back and raised money 5 years later, that's when the hospital doubled what they were committing. They went from 250,000 to 500,000, and others really, they could see, again, it ties back to some of those earlier slides, that people can see that their money's being well spent and that there's a return on investment from that. When you come back, they're going to not only re-up, they're going to commit more. 6 big mistakes in any fundraising campaign. Number 1 is insufficient orientation of the volunteer leaders and staff, so they're not able to answer questions and talk intelligently about the mission. Seems simple, but it's really critical. Invalid or incomplete case for support. Again, you're going to have some really difficult questions. It's important that you have the answers that you can answer those intelligently. Selecting wrong campaign leaders. Either that, or you go to someone and to lead the campaign and they say no, then you go to a second and they say no, and a third. Word gets around town that there's a reason that people aren't committing to help lead your campaign, and that will sink your effort. So selecting the wrong campaign leaders is one of the biggest mistakes. Unrealistic evaluation of investor prospects. Again, getting back to how we had talked about asking for too much, that can be a real big problem and turn people off. And solicitation of investors without proper cultivation. Again, running out and just asking people for money because it's quick and maybe your organization needs cash right away. Not the best way to go about maximizing the total amount of your funding. And then failure of campaign leaders to make their pledges early. If someone's out there asking someone else for money, but they haven't already made their commitment themselves, that's trouble. So I've talked really soup to nuts about the actual capital campaign. Annual campaigns are another really good way, especially when you're looking to maximize the amount of money you're spending as an organization and getting that return on investment that has been the theme through much of this presentation. Annual campaigns, just to kind of go through a quick synopsis for those not super familiar, is the internal review, which is about 2 weeks, where we review your positioning material, what you're doing currently. Maybe you already have an annual campaign, and trying to figure out where we can improve, looking at the board and staff and giving history of all your constituents, and then preparing and doing preparing for the outreach. And then we're defining those outcomes that are so difficult to nail down, and then putting together and finalizing the case for investment, similar as what we talked about before. And then in the next 2 phases, 3 and 4, is the outreach and the connection building, which there's a typo there. And then, getting your key leaders together and going out and getting those commitments. And obviously this is something that's an ongoing basis. The capital campaign is different in the fact that it's a very defined, here's our 5-year plan, here's what it's going to take to get there, here's where our current funding is, here's the gap, and this is where we need to go. An annual campaign is something that builds from year to year and is updated on an annual basis. And so it's a different animal, so to speak, but also just a really, really good way when you're looking to maximize the amount of and how you're spending your money as an organization. I've mentioned asking rights a few times. Ultimately, your asking rights are these 6 buckets: having a compelling mission, a compelling need and sense of urgency, an effective plan to meet the need. You need to have the organizational effectiveness and fundraising strength, a constituency that has adequate financial resources. I mean, if you are in the middle of nowhere and you don't really have a constituency there that will fund you, obviously that's going to be a problem. And then again, a lot of this stuff seems to be redundant, but it all ties together, I promise. Potential campaign leaders are available, interested, and committed. Ultimately, if you have these 6 things, then you have asking rights and you will be successful in your fundraising efforts. So a lot of people say, well, you keep using return on investment, you talk about investors. I mean, are people going to get like residual checks in the mail if they give money to your organization? No. What is the difference between a donor and an investor? Ultimately, a donor, and again, some of this is kind of, I guess, impressions of nonprofits and the older days maybe. Have you demonstrated the need for your services? An investor standpoint is, how will funding your organization improve the situation? A donor, what activities do you undertake to address the need? An activity, again, it's just something that you do. It can be, oh, we hosted so many people today, but what does that mean? An investor would say, what results did you deliver, and how do they improve the lives of your primary customers? Totally different dynamic. A donor, have we spread our available funding across those nonprofits addressing the issue? And an investor, what is the right amount of money for your organization to bring about real change? Really tough questions, right? And different ways to look at them. But again, if you can look at things from more of an investor lens as you are putting together your communications and getting ready to go out and ask for support, you'll be better off in our experience. So one of the things that has been communicated to us during the pandemic is they've had trouble engaging board leadership, maybe even before a pandemic. And just a couple recommendations here. Number one, obviously communication is number one, especially during this time when people can't get together to a certain extent. You want to have regular updates. Don't sugarcoat anything. Our mantra is give it to people straight, good, bad, or ugly. They'll respect you in the end. And then asking board members to touch base with core supporters. For some people, this is not their forte. They don't feel comfortable, and that's fine. You can find other things for those board members to do. But a lot of times we feel that hearing from other community stakeholders is preferred over maybe hearing from someone on your staff. You always want to enlist and solicit feedback. Survey board members for their candid input and feedback. Make sure it's anonymous so you can get honest answers. And stay positive and make sure you share success stories. I get an update every Friday from the Raleigh Chamber of Commerce about all the wonderful things that have happened that week and positive news stories, and it's wonderful to see. And then I've already mentioned the law of inertia, and a body in motion tends to stay in motion, and a body at rest tends to stay at rest. And so you want to have that positive forward momentum with your board, and make sure you set short and long-term achievable goals. Again, achievable goals, not just goals that are pie in the sky. And then make sure that everyone has a role. Again, if it's not reaching out to some of your donors and investors, then that they have other things that they feel valued and that their time is well spent. And you want to make sure that everybody's rowing in the same direction. So now I've got a few slides to talk through fundraising during the pandemic, and really just some general guidelines here about just planning for today's economic environment. Obviously, a lot of you have already done this, but it's just resetting organization goals, your footprint, how you're going to be able to achieve the things that you're going to achieve, and then laying out decisions and assumptions for each scenario. You know, if there's a second or third or fourth wave, or if there's a oh gosh, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, if there's a I'm not thinking of it at the moment, but basically if things turn around and there's a cure, okay, then you plan for that scenario too. So you want to, again, develop reasonable goals that are achievable, not pie in the sky. You want to be able to revise your tactics with an online focus short term, which everyone I think has probably already done. You want to ask tough questions about each and right size your initiatives. Maybe some things that you're doing you need to just not do for a certain period of time until things get better. And then be prepared to pivot as necessary. I think 2020 has been the year of pivots. I think on a personal level and a business level, I've pivoted so many times, I don't even know what day it is some weeks, but customization and being fluid is critical. And again, you know, this is not day one of the pandemic. We're pretty deep into this. So a lot of this may not be something that is new for each of the nonprofits represented here, but it is something just to understand and make sure that you're able to mold and shift and shape accordingly. So I haven't really talked to you too much about virtual fundraising, but I do have a couple of slides just to give a broad brush overview. There's a host of different ways that you can do online fundraising, anything from online giving, the text to give, which is easy, simple to use, crowdfunding, merchandise sales, which is online, peer-to-peer, and then virtual events. So I'll talk through a few of these. I don't have time to go through each and every one, but virtual fundraising in and of itself offers a simplified donation process for your donors. Can be completed from the comfort and safety of their home, which virtually is good. Makes use of common tools in the digital age, allows for more flexible payment options, and obviously can vary by methods of promotion, donation process, and overall objectives. And the beauty about virtual fundraising is you can do lots of different things and they can all be done at the same time. You could have a peer-to-peer fundraising effort along with merchandise sales, and you can kind of piggyback these things to best fit your particular situation and your needs. So best practices with virtual campaigns, making sure that all campaigns are optimized for mobile. That's an absolute must. Invest in the right virtual fundraising software. Allow for streamlined recurring donation setup, also critical. Having a well-designed donation page, and then encouraging supporters to share your campaign. Again, some basic stuff, but something that, you know, we wanted to at least cover to make sure that everyone understands the basics of virtual fundraising. So virtual events, getting away from the sort of virtual campaigns. If possible, keep an event open for a longer time span to generate more support and really to get the word out about the event. Encourage supporters and attendees to invite others. Kind of basic, but important. Target planned events to your specific audience. Promote events long beforehand and allow for extra donations on top of ticket sales. And, you know, for some organizations, if you can't host virtual, if you can't host, you know, in-person events, doing these virtual events for someone that can't attend, you know, donating their ticket and or being able to donate items for auction is something that would be good to do. So I get asked this a lot, especially this year, and I think to an extent, I talked about it with the mayor a little bit at the beginning of the conversation, and a lot of people, I think, have been a little bit too timid during this time to go out and ask for money. And if there's one big piece of advice I would like to give everyone today, it is don't make a decision for your stakeholders without going out and asking them. I've seen time and time again, nonprofits say, you know what, there's no way we're going out to ask for money right now. We don't want to appear tone deaf. Everyone's hurting. And we don't want to be asking for money when they're themselves either in need or their company's not doing well. But I say, absolutely, you should ask. Depending on the need of your organization and the constituents that you serve, you may have much more need now than ever before. And you not only should ask for money, but you absolutely should ask for additional support because the need is so great. And don't be shy. We have seen, I have a couple examples here, but we've seen time and time again, there was a YMCA up in Hickory, I think it was Hickory, North Carolina. There was a couple that we had been cultivating but hadn't asked for money. And then the pandemic hit and everything was shut down. And I think they came forward in like April, like right when everything was just like, you know, locked down. They gave $1 million to that fundraising campaign. They weren't even asked for the money, but they knew they had time to reflect during the lockdown. They wanted to make an impact. They wanted to make a difference, and they came forward and donated $1 million. We have multiple other campaigns that we managed that have been extremely successful. I think to an extent, we might not be raising as much as we normally would in better times, but we're absolutely hitting our goals, and people are digging into their pockets and helping. And it's been so heartwarming to see. But again, don't be shy. You should still go out and cultivate your stakeholders, make those asks, make sure you're asking for enough, but you will be successful. It's amazing the power of the human spirit, and everyone knows we're going through tough times and people will step up. I would just say, assume the positive in that regard. There was a campaign that we helped out with, Convergent did on a just a pro bono basis that raised almost $1 million for small businesses in downtown Raleigh because there were so many businesses that were hurt by the pandemic. And this was done right in the middle of the summer, right when all these organizations were and everyone was at home. We were able to go out and pounding the phone and making, you know, the peer-to-peer and the whole 9 yards. We were able to raise almost $1 million to help those small businesses in downtown Raleigh. And it was, I'll end on that. It was a wonderful story, and it was one of these many stories I think that have been out there that you hear, that it was the community rallying together in a time of need, and we were able to accomplish things that I don't think most would have thought possible, especially during the crush that was that initial sort of April and May, right after everyone was locked down. So in any case, I hope that this has been enlightening for you. Again, I appreciate your time. And it looks like I've finished about an hour and 15 minutes, right on time, and we have 15 minutes for Q&A. Happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Hey, Andy. Hey, everyone. I'm Kristen Harper from Convergent. I'm the Director of Marketing. And yes, Andy, thank you. Right on time. We did get a few questions into the chat, the panelist chat, but feel free, those of you who are still with us, a few people had to drop off, but those of you who are still with us, if you'd like to put a question in the Q&A or in the chat, I can throw them over to Andy to make sure he sees them. But Andy, I'll go ahead and give you the few that were put in the panelist chat.
Okay.
The first question was a little early on in the presentation, and I think you covered it somewhat, but I'd like to just put it out there to be sure it's overtly covered. What falls under the definition of a capital campaign?
Well, it's very broad. A lot of people think that a capital campaign means that you're raising money for a building, and that's not true. Generally, a capital campaign is as simple as this. It is taking the vision of your organization, putting it on paper, and then forecasting it out over time. It's almost like a strategic plan, except now you're raising money to fund the initiatives of that plan. And so again, as I did cover it, it really is just kind of saying, here's where the organization has been, here's where we are today, here's where we would like to go, but we don't have the resources to get there, right? And so that's where the capital campaign, the fundraising campaign, is to what will fund that long-term vision. And of course, you're laying out with these additional resources, this is going to be the additional impact. Here's the impact we have now, but oh boy, if we had additional funding, here's how many more people we could feed, or homeless we could shelter, or fill in the blank. There's that outcomes component, but ultimately a capital campaign is really just funding a long-term plan. It does not have to be bricks and mortar. It can be a whole host of things, and up to and including an endowment.
Great, thank you. The other question that was asked is, are we, and I'm assuming Convergent, making major gift solicitations virtually? And if so, how successful has that been for the nonprofits we've worked with?
Yeah, I didn't get into the specifics of how we're doing fundraising today, but we, for the first time in our history, have completed feasibility studies 100% virtually. In many cases, we like to customize our studies the best we can. We're actually doing a feasibility study in Prosser in Washington for Prosser Memorial Health. And we've offered the people that we're doing the study interviews with the opportunity to do them via Zoom or in person. Most everybody has actually opted for in person, but I flew all the way out there from North Carolina, and I actually conducted a couple Zoom interviews, even though I was right down the street in Prosser, because people weren't comfortable meeting in person, and that's okay. But actually, we've had, to answer your question specifically about the major gifts, we have done quite a few major gift solicitations, and they have been successful. And we have a lot of war stories from the front lines of our campaign directors that have used everyone from, say, public officials, honorary campaign volunteers, staff members. You can actually bring in a whole host of people all at once into a Zoom meeting and make it extremely interactive. We've also had success in doing small group briefings. So if you're trying to tackle a group of attorneys or the car dealers or healthcare providers or whatever else, you can invite all of them together, and then maybe you have a couple of key leaders that are within that space that have already made commitments that are now telling the story to a wider audience. So it absolutely can be successful. It is successful. Everyone's just, again, pivoted, just like we talked about before, to making sure that we're making solicitations just in a safe way. But there's actually some things that you can do virtually that you can't do as easily in person. So like anything, I think there's some advantages and disadvantages. We prefer to be in person and to get the warm and fuzzies and the personal touches, but there's actually some things that we can do virtually that that actually benefit.
Andy, I have a question. This is Doug.
Yeah.
Curious, obviously you look at the news every day and it seems like the issues of unemployment, human services, homelessness, a lot of those types of things seem to get a lot of the attention, which they deserve. But I'm just curious, there's a whole, layer of nonprofits out there in the arts and other areas. The beginning numbers that you were showing from a national side of how giving has gone for nonprofits in general. Has there been a certain sector that's maybe not fared as well? And does that, is there any advice for that?
Yes. I mean, to an extent, the reality is, Doug, is that there are certain sectors that have not fared as well. And I tell you, museums, I think organizations like Symphony, maybe a downtown theater, these sectors are getting pounded right now because they are not allowed to have people in their facilities, and they can't host shows. And that's their bread and butter. They're organizations that actually have revenue specific to people coming and actually experiencing that event or that museum. And so, again, a lot of these organizations are doing things virtually. They're hosting concerts virtually. They're trying to keep their season ticket holders, happy in certain regards by, pivoting and doing whatever they can in just a different environment. I know that I've actually talked to the Yakima Symphony several times. They're doing mini concerts between some of their performers that are keeping their stakeholders engaged. But there's no question that there have been some nonprofits that are not necessarily ignored, but there's not the sense of urgency there as with some of those nonprofits. Now, having said that, I think leading up into the beginning of Q1 and Q2 next year, we're advising clients, and especially in those sectors, to not wait too long. Don't wait until everything's all rosy and then launch your fundraising effort. We feel, I don't have a crystal ball, but in general, the consensus is that by the middle of next year, summer going into third quarter, there is going to be an absolute tsunami of nonprofits going forward with major capital campaigns, fundraising campaigns. And those that kind of lean in a little early, and don't be shy, don't be afraid. I'm not saying pull the trigger today, but definitely by second quarter next year to beat the crowd, because it will get extremely crowded. We feel middle to third quarter next year for sure.
Okay. Yeah, I've kind of heard the same thing out there, that it seems like obviously the items that were in the heavy national news seem to be getting more of attention.
Yeah.
So, but were there any other questions in the chat at this point?
We did not have any other questions, Doug. We had a few people who said thank you, Andy, that this was very helpful, and had to drop out. So
Absolutely. It's been a wonderful program. We felt, from a standpoint of economic development, process that we go through on a daily business with the for-profit companies, that when we started looking at the nonprofit community, they're great employers. They're a big part of the local economy and the quality of life that any community wants to offer to its citizens in the region. And so that's why we felt this was an important series to put on and to host, and hopefully the videos that will always be online in our video library with our other classes, that it'll be watched over and over again. And I would just like to thank you both, Andy and Christine, as far as all the work you've put into this, and we look forward to the next program on November 17th. And I don't know, Andy, do you want to give a little preview to what he's going to talk about? I know you did a little bit at the beginning.
Well, Kristen, I'll let you. I've done a lot of talking right now, so Kristen, I'm going to let you do your marketing
Absolutely. Tom Ralser is going to lead the next webinar, and Tom, as Andy said at the beginning, is an accomplished author with a brand new book called The 5-Minute Fundraiser. And that book actually goes into detail on some of what Tom will talk about next week, which is our really our unique way of fundraising and kind of the system that we've built our entire fundraising model around. It's an investment-driven model for fundraising, and there are 3 specific components to asking rights that give you the right to ask for money as a nonprofit. And Tom will go into detail on what those